what you guys have all been waiting for, our keynote speaker. I'd like to introduce Carl Duivenvoorden as a speaker, writer, and sustainability consultant. So thank you guys all for listening, and I hope to see you guys later at 1 p.m.
Thank you very much, Bailey. Just waiting for that mic to work. Something is working. There we go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and Your Honor, and Nigel, Bailey, organizing committee, thank you very much for the honor of having me here today as your keynote speaker. There is always so much to say and so little time. So let's get started with this. It's so great to see you in person. You know, we've all been, for the last couple of years, stuck in this world of Zoom, and you've been there, I've been there, and you know, this is what the ideal Zoom looks like, right? Whenever I'm presenting on a computer screen. But I'm savvy enough to know that usually the reality is a bit more like that. So it's nice to see you here today in person, because this way at least I can tell if I'm starting to lose you. Years ago, author Paul Hawkins said, "This planet came with a set of operating instructions, but we seem to have misplaced them. Important rules like don't poison the water, the soil, or the air, and don't touch the thermostat have been broken." So what I'd like to do over this time we have together, this brief time, is just cover three things with you. First, I'd like to speak a bit about some of the more recent developments in climate change, what I would call the sharp barbs of climate change, the things that keep me awake, hence that image. Secondly, where we are and where we need to go. And then thirdly, as long as you're still with me, a few closing thoughts that I hope that you will carry with you from this room. So let's get started then with the things that keep me awake as someone who has worked in the climate space now for over a decade and a half. And I would call this the scariest slide of the entire slideshow here. Now you probably recognize it, right? That's an exponential growth curve. That's growth that's increasing at an increasing rate. And if you need a reminder, it's what happens to your credit card balance if you don't pay it off. It also represents so much of our human impact on the planet. Exponential growth in terms of consumption of resources. And for the purpose of this presentation, I'd like to single in on this: global consumption of oil, coal, and natural gas. We first discovered the magic of fossil fuels and the wonderful gifts they were to us back at the start of the Industrial Revolution, about 1750, when we built the first machines that would use that energy and do work for us, and life got better. And it was so good, we kept doing it, to the point where today we are the luckiest generation ever, because we've built more and more machines to do more and more work for us, and that means less and less for us to do, and we have far greater capabilities. The only thing is, along the way, we've been burning more and more and more and more fossil fuels. They produce emissions, the main one, carbon dioxide, not a poison, but we're discovering that if we add too much of that stuff to our atmosphere, it amplifies the Earth's natural greenhouse effect, and it makes it warmer and causes a lot of other consequences. We know this, but we're having a really hard time reversing this exponential growth curve. Because fossil fuels are so permeated into everything we do, you could say we're addicted. And de-addiction from anything is a huge challenge. Now, I think intuitively, we all can understand what exponential growth means, but hopefully this little stat drives it a bit more home for you in this context, and it is the significance of 1994. If you imagined all of the oil, coal, and natural gas that has been consumed by humanity since the start of the Industrial Revolution, Since 1750 to today, half of it has been consumed since 1994, the last 30 years. I mean, that just blows me away. That's not just in my lifetime, but that's in my professional career. I was already in my third job in 1994. Put another way, if you imagine the time from 1750 to today as 1 hour, half of everything consumed in that 1 hour was consumed in the last 6 minutes. That's exponential growth. And you look at that and you say, but that's just a schematic exponential growth curve, except look how it overlays over our actual consumption of fossil fuels. Small little blip during the pandemic, but we're still increasing. Not as aggressively because some of the actions are taking hold, but you see the challenge. Exponential growth in our consumption. And here's the next exponential growth curve then. This is the level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. If we go back to, let's put a few numbers to this. Back at the start of the Industrial Revolution, we'd just come through a long period of climate stability, and there were about 277 parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Fast forward to 1962, a really important year for me, because it was the year I was born. And we're already up 43 points to 320 parts per million. But fast forward to Saturday, and we are at 423 parts per million. In my lifetime, more than 100 parts per million increase. 70% of that entire increase has happened in my lifetime. And I don't feel that old. What a dramatic change. I don't know about you, but that just blows me away. Well, then, if this truly is amplifying our natural greenhouse effect, then we should be seeing symptoms, right? Hottest 10 years on record globally have been the last 10 years. I've been doing this work for over a decade and a half. Every year I've had to modify this slide. Every single year. How are we doing so far in 2024? I've never seen that. And I'm already certain I'll be modifying that slide again come January. Even in Atlantic Canada, we're seeing differences here in our area. You know, weather's a chaotic system, so weather records happen. Every now and then you hear the person on the radio saying, yeah, we set a new record yesterday. The only thing is, in a stable climate, we should be setting the same number of new record highs and new record lows, right? Over the last few years, not even close. Last year was 5-1. The year prior was an even greater ratio. I don't have the numbers calculated yet for how far we are this year, but I'm pretty sure they're going in that direction. Well, as the authors of this book said, folks, this ain't normal for us. But wait, there's a bit more to this too. And I'm afraid I could go on for a long time on this because there's so much to say when it comes to impacts of climate change that, well, if I could nominate a mascot for climate change, I'd nominate the octopus because of the tentacles that go into everything. Climate change tentacles reach everywhere into our lives. I'd like to just quickly focus on two of those tentacles that I think are most impactful for us, and in large measure in this part of the country too. There's sea level rise and intensification of weather systems. First one, sea level rise. You hear about how ice is melting over the ocean, right? That doesn't change sea levels because that's like an ice cube already floating in a glass of water. It doesn't change the level of water in the glass. No, the big concern is those chunks of ice that are sitting out of the water up on the land. Because when they melt, that water runs into the ocean. It's incremental. That will change the level of our oceans. And the biggest chunks are Antarctica by far, plus glaciers and mountains, plus this, Greenland. A massive ice sheet about the size of Quebec, the province of Quebec. At its thickest, about 3 kilometers, 6 times the height of the CN Tower. There is a lot of water locked up in Greenland, and increasingly we're seeing a bit of this happening in Greenland. A lot of water tumbling off and entering into the ocean. It's a big deal, especially when you live right next to the water, as we do here. But here's the second tentacle I wanted to touch on with you, and that is intensification of our weather systems, which are based on the water cycle, right? Remember from back school, water evaporates from bodies of water, it condenses up in the air, and then it comes down again as precipitation. Well, the thing is, it's simple physics that when the water is warmer, it evaporates more quickly. When we have warmer air, it can hold a much bigger chunk of water and then unleash it in a much larger quantity. And we're seeing more intense weather systems. I mean, scientists are so cautious, they always say, well, something could be related to climate change, but they are very, very hesitant to say that was climate change. But I would have a really hard time arguing that Hurricane Fiona that roared through here a few years ago was not a direct result of climate change. I mean, look at this graphic from the CBC's weatherman. You see that the ocean was record warm 400 kilometers further north than usual. In other words, it was fueling a hurricane for 400 kilometers further north when that hurricane normally would have started petering out, and instead it pounded us here in Atlantic Canada, particularly Nova Scotia, PEI, and then Port aux Basques, Newfoundland. Impacts of climate change. And, well, when you put the two together, rising sea levels and in more intense weather systems, you get some interesting things start to happen. Because, for example, a couple of years ago here in New Brunswick, a study was done to see what will be the impacts of those on our coastlines. Here's one page from that study done in 2020, and in fact, it's the page for the coastline that's right outside here on the Bay of Fundy. An awful lot of numbers, I apologize for that, but let's zero in on the numbers that I think matter most. If you look right here, you see that back in 2010, a storm surge of 4.7 meters was likely once every 50 to 100 years, right here. Fast forward to 2030, that's only 6 years from now, and we see a storm surge like that is likely every 10 years. Pretty dramatic difference, pretty quick. Fast forward to 2050, and you see it's likely every 2 years. That's only 26 years from now. And then fast forward to the turn of the century, and it's off the chart. Sea level rise doesn't stop rising just because we hit another century. There's a lot of water out there. And here's another one that is very topical to us in the eastern part of the country, I can tell you, and that is the Isthmus of Chignecto, the little bar of land that connects New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. It's been in the news lately because the cost of protecting it is enormous and growing all the time. And our governments are trying to work out a deal who is going to pay for this. And in the meantime, the cost goes up. But if we fail to do anything, well, Nova Scotia will become an island in the foreseeable future. That's the impact of rising sea levels and more intense weather events. And there are so many more tentacles, so many more things related to climate change. Not enough time for them all, but I can tell you all of these interconnected things remind me of one of my favorite quotes from Aboriginal Chief Seattle 170 years ago. He said, "Man does not weave the web of life. He's merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself." All things are connected. All things are connected. Everything we do comes with a consequence. So there's part one, probably the lengthiest part, but a few sharp pieces in there that I hope will impact you. So let's cover then where we are and where we need to go with this. And I would declare this is probably the most important slide of the entire slideshow. This is the carbon cycle. Carbon's a pretty mobile element in our world. It goes up when we exhale or burn anything or when anything organic rots. It comes down again thanks to anything green, whether it's forest, grassland, or whether it's phytoplankton in the ocean. And over many years, the carbon cycle has been balanced. Same amount of carbon going up, same amount of carbon coming down. But we've come along and we've dug up fossils and fossil fuels that were safely locked out of the carbon cycle, not for decades, centuries, millennia, but for millions of years, safely locked out, and we've been adding them on one side of the cycle. In some parts of the world, the ability of greenery to reabsorb is impaired. Well, you don't need to be a genius or a mathematician to know what will happen. If you accelerate here, slow down here, more stuff builds up here. So the simplest solution of all to climate change is basically we need to rebalance the carbon cycle. We need to rebalance the carbon cycle. Not simple. Let's dive a little deeper. If we keep going in the direction where we are right now, let's call this business as usual, our emissions will keep climbing, perhaps even with a little exponential growth to them as well. But if we believe the world's best scientists, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, drawn of scientists all over the world, you could call them the PMAC of world maintenance and reliability. The folks who are closest in on the systems that make our planet work and what impacts them. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change scientists. If you believe them, from a 2018 report, they concluded if we want to keep warming limited to 1.5 degrees, then we need to reduce our emissions down 45%, not from where we are now, but where we were in 2010. And then between 2030 and 2050, we need to bring ourselves down to net zero. Ouch. Any way you look at that, that is a really steep curve, And right about now, you're thinking, man, we sure could use something magical that we could just plug our wires into and get all the renewable, sustainable energy that we need. The bad news is that, at least as far as we know now, there is no silver bullet solution to this. The good news is there is silver buckshot. In other words, there are many different technologies which, if combined, each can bring that line down a bit, and when combined, can bring it down to where it needs to be. Renewable energy is obviously one of the big slices there, but most of the other ones, they start with things like more efficient vehicles, public transit systems, urban design, homes, commercial buildings, industrial processes, you name it, more efficient everything. But if we apply all of these with diligence, we can get down to where we need to go. We have the technology to do it. So why isn't it happening quite so quickly? It seems to me what's really needed is what I like to refer to as a global epiphany. In other words, we need to wake up to the crisis that is around us. It's not fashionable, I can tell you, to be up on a stage, to be talking about crisis and emergency. But how can you look at this stuff and think anything other? So maybe it's time we took a deep breath and said, aha, this is it. And let's get to work. Or to paraphrase that great philosopher, Bob the Builder, let's get to work and let's make the fix happen. So the good thing is we're seeing a lot of stuff happening already now. And I never would want to belittle all the good things that are happening already now. This is New Brunswick's first pretty large-scale solar farm, which was officially opened just over a year ago. And it's a great start. We need a lot more. But it's interesting, too, that many people instantly go to renewable energy as the holy grail for solutions. And in fact, maybe it would be good for us to take a step back and to be guided instead by this, the energy efficiency pyramid and its 3 stages, because maybe there's actually a better place to start where we get more bang for the buck. Because the energy efficiency pyramid has as stage 1, reduce the demand for energy. Chronological, right? Stage 2, use energy efficient equipment. And then finally at stage 3, when you've got your energy consumption down as low as you can make it, then opt for renewable energy. Now, there's a certain logic in there too, but there's a certain financial incentive in this too, because you see, stage one actions are often actions in changing human behavior and habits. They're really cheap. We bring our teams on board. They might cost 2 cents per kilowatt hour saved. That's a deal. If we go to the next stage, energy efficient equipment, there are tons of options from weather sealing to better windows to heat pumps. Still really competitive, 7 cents per kilowatt hour saved. Then when you get up to renewable energy solutions, well, prices are coming down, but in some cases still be competitive with grid power. In other cases, they're still a bit on the bubble. And renewable energy sources need backup as well, which adds to the complications and to the cost. So stage one, stage two are more important, really, than stage three, which is often deemed as the sexy stage, renewables. But don't underestimate the potential of efficiency. And maybe this is one of the good key messages for you to take away this morning. Because this, from the International Energy Agency, that spends a lot of time with its nose into the data, studying these things. And last year, the International Energy Agency figured that if we upped our game on energy efficiency, we could reduce global emissions by 2030 by 1/3. Bang! That's not a small slice. That's enormous. What a potential. I think a lot of that potential lies before you in the work that you do. The potential of energy efficiency. The good news is we can see the markets are starting to respond. This from Bloomberg. It's also an exponential growth curve. This one, a good one. But you see where the investment is now starting to flow. And that's a really good thing. So then, some final words to close off. A few added thoughts I'd like to share with you. I was in Copenhagen, Denmark, a number of years ago, and I saw this guy on the street, and I decided to take a picture because it struck me. If we were back home, what would be used to carry those 6 sticks of wood? Probably not a little Mini Cooper, but it speaks to the power of culture, efficiency culture, or maybe culture that is a bit less efficient. But it seems to me we have a lot of room to make efficiency part of our culture. And once we do, the potential for improvement and savings is incredible. It's nice to see that there are some big projects already happening in this country and elsewhere where people are using good creative thinking to get what would have otherwise been wasted energy. For example, this was a story in Corporate Knights a year ago about a hospital complex in Toronto that started tapping the heat out of wastewater, reduced their natural gas bill by 90%. 90%. Took a bit of upfront investment, 90% savings is nothing to scoff at. In Oslo, Norway, 13,000 apartments are heated by heat removed from wastewater that's just otherwise would be running out of the town and into the lagoons and the rivers and the water. Apparently in Vancouver, there's a similar project in False Creek, 3,000 apartment units being heated with the heat from wastewater. Maybe we need to attune ourselves a little bit more to all the potential energy supplies that are out there that we've previously dismissed as waste. Because if the more we can wring out of that energy dollar, the better it is for the environment, but also the better it is for our bottom lines. I speak in a fair number of schools, and sometimes in schools you can tell there's not too much happening in the sustainability front. But sometimes you go to schools and sustainability is everywhere, and there's enthusiasm, there's action, there are results. And the reason is because there's a champion usually on staff in that school who is carrying the flag and it's spreading and building a culture of sustainability in that school. I think the same applies to your workplaces. Is there a champion for sustainability at your workplace? Could that be you? Could you bring the boss on board? Because that's really, really important. Bottom line is sustainability tends to happen more so when there are champions who carry the flag of sustainability. And you don't have to do it on your own and invent things from scratch. There's this whole field called social marketing, which is essentially a how-to guide in terms of how do we help people change behaviors. I'll be speaking more about that in the subsequent presentation I'm making in this room right afterwards. Social marketing, not social media, social marketing. There are people, sometimes when we talk to them about climate change, their response is, well, we'll just adapt. And I really struggle with that because I think to myself, how can you adapt to something that is still changing? It's dynamic, it hasn't stabilized. We need to mitigate. But I've always had a hard time figuring out how can I articulate that. And then I found this nice quote in The Guardian a few years ago. If your home was flooding because you'd left the faucet on, your first step wouldn't be to start mopping. You'd first cut the flooding off at its source, the faucet. We would, right? Every one of us would. We'd go and turn the tap off before we'd grab the mop. Maybe another analogy would be a leaky roof. Sure, we'd put the pails up to catch the leaks so they don't damage the floor. But as soon as the weather's good, you know we'd be up there fixing the roof. We have to, or else the roof would eventually rot and the whole thing would fall apart. Adapt or mitigate? Well, yeah, we kind of have to adapt because of the hole we've brought ourselves into, but good heavens, we have to turn off the tap, hence the net zero requirements. Einstein said we can't solve our problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them in the first place. My take on his words, maybe we need to rethink everything we hold to be true. It's a big deal, isn't it? I mean, challenging all of our paradigms. And yet we live in a time like no other when it comes to this challenge that we face. I spend a lot of time in the world of sustainability, and I'm always looking for the magic solutions or the best ways or how we are going to get through this. And to me, all of the solutions that I see kind of boil themselves down to two main things. One, we need to start looking at all of our decisions, not just through a lens of profitability or convenience, but through a lens of sustainability. What is the impact of this decision on our planet and on the 7 generations? And secondly, we need to work together like never before. And we need to take care of each other to make sure that no one is left behind. One last story I'd like to share with you. That would be, about 5 years ago, I was listening to a radio program where people were calling in about sustainability issues. And a lady called in, and she was just bubbling about her electric car and the solar panel that she had for charging it, and my jaw dropped. I thought, wow, I want that. But it seems so far off, so impossible, so futuristic. Well, fast forward to today. That's our electric car right there. And behind it is part of the solar system that powers the car and our home 100%. Not 2050, not 2040, not 2030, but in 2024. And I put that up. Please don't take it as boasting, because honestly, I'm not very smart with these things. If I can do something like this, anyone can. It's a matter of commitment to it, you see. But the more important reason that I put it up is this. Change is also exponential. And if that's the difference between the past 5 years, imagine the potential of the next 5 years and see your place in that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me here today. I hope there were some helpful insights, learnings, and thoughts, and most importantly, some things that you can take away now and incorporate into your everyday work to help us bend that curve down to where it needs to be for a future world of prosperity for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that opening keynote, Carl. That was very inspirational, and certainly makes me think about all the things that I want to also do in my personal life and how I can change and contribute to help mitigate